The 2026 Senate elections are coming up fast. Republicans are looking to defend their 53-seat majority. In today's video, we're going to be filling out the map based on a combination of the latest polls and forecasts in every single race. There are 35 seats up for election. We'll begin by filling in the solid states for both parties where we do not yet have any polling data available. Starting with the Republicans, we have Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. South Dakota, Kansas, and Oklahoma. Then in the South, there's Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, South Carolina, and Tennessee. And finally, in the Midwest, we have Kentucky and West Virginia. Republicans are running for re-election in each of these states, except for Kentucky, where Mitch McConnell is retiring, and Alabama, where Tommy Tuberville is running for governor. But that won't matter, as Kentucky and Alabama are two of the reddest states in the nation. Now, as for the Democrats, they'll safely hold their seats in Oregon, Colorado, New Mexico, and Illinois. Then up in the Northeast, Delaware, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. Together, those 8 states raise the Democratic seat count to 42, though they trail Republicans, who are now projected to reach 46 seats, with 15 of their own safe states added to their column as well. That leaves just 12 competitive races, a historically low number of seats in which both parties have at least some chance at winning. And that reality puts Republicans in a commanding position. In fact, according to 538, this is the fewest vulnerable seats any president's party has had to defend in a recent midterm. The math is actually pretty simple. Republicans can hold their Senate majority just by defending 3 of the 7 remaining seats in states Donald Trump carried in 2024: Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, Iowa, Nebraska, Texas, and Alaska. And that's before even factoring in pickup opportunities in states like Michigan and potentially even New Hampshire. For Democrats, meanwhile, let's assume for the sake of argument they managed to hold all 4 of their remaining seats in states Kamala Harris won: Minnesota, Michigan, Virginia, and New Hampshire. Even then, they'd still need to retain their seat in Georgia and flip 4 of the 7 remaining Republican-held seats to get to 51. And here's where the math gets even more daunting of those 7 Republican-held seats. Take a look at Trump's 2024 margin. The clearest Democratic pickup opportunity is in Maine, which Harris carried by nearly 7 points, followed by North Carolina, where Trump's margin was just 3. But the other 5, Ohio, Nebraska, Alaska, Iowa, and Texas, were all carried by Trump by double-digit margins. So even in a strong blue wave year, the math for a Democratic Senate majority in 2026 probably isn't there. All right, now with that frame in place, let's dive into these 12 competitive races, going in order of how competitive I believe they really are. So starting in Alaska, a fundamentally strong Republican state. All 3 major forecasters, with the exception of the less reputable race to the White House, currently rate this race as solidly Republican. That's largely due to Alaska's deep red partisan lean. The state hasn't elected a Democrat to federal office since 2008, and Donald Trump carried the last frontier by 13 points in the 2024 presidential election. Adding to the GOP's advantage, former Congresswoman Mary Peltola, widely considered the Democrats' best potential challenger, is reportedly more likely to run for governor rather than take on incumbent Senator Dan Sullivan. That's a significant development, especially considering Peltola actually led Sullivan by 3 points in the only poll conducted here so far. But until her plans are official, and given Alaska's unique ranked choice voting system, which always introduces some added uncertainty, we'll hold this race in the likely Republican column for now. If Peltola officially bows out, this one would instantly shift to safe. On a similar note to Alaska, Nebraska is another fundamentally strong Republican state. Donald Trump carried the Cornhusker state by more than 20 points last November. Every major forecaster says Pete Ricketts is heavily favored for re-election, but the threat of another independent bid by Dan Osborne looms large here. You might remember Osborne from last cycle when he came within 7 points of unseating longtime Senator Deb Fischer. He proved to be a formidable fundraiser, effectively branding himself as not a Trump Republican, but also not a Democrat, allowing him to appeal to independents, moderate Republicans, and Democrats alike. Now looking ahead to 2026, the only poll thus far surveyed by Change Research released in early April shows a surprisingly tight race. Incumbent Republican Pete Ricketts leads independent Dan Osborne by just 1 point, 46% to 45%. Ricketts isn't a popular candidate, even within his own party, so if Osborne decides to run again, we could be looking at a genuinely competitive race, especially with 2026 shaping up to be a more favorable cycle for Democrats than 2024. Nebraska goes down as likely Republican on our map. Also, in the likely Republican column is Iowa, where the race just became a lot more interesting. Republican Senator Joni Ernst drew a whole lot of negative attention during a town hall earlier this month, prompting several Democrats to jump into the race, seeing an opening even in a state that's shifted sharply to the right over the past decade. Trump carried Iowa by 13 points in 2024. The largest margin for either party since Nixon's 49-state landslide in 1972. But Ernst's comments, combined with the entries of J.D. Scholten and State Senator Zach Walz, have led both the Cook Political Report and Sabato's Crystal Ball to move the race into the likely Republican column. The only poll so far, from public policy polling in early June, shows Ernst leading a generic Democrat by just 2 points. I'm inclined to follow the forecaster's lead, placing Iowa alongside Alaska and Nebraska in that same likely Republican tier. Another race that I think fits into this tier of very likely to be held by one party is Virginia, but this time for Democrats. Incumbent Mark Warner has not said whether he will run for election to a 4th term, but is signaling that he will. In that case, the only factor that could make this race competitive is if outgoing Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin throws his hat into the ring. Warner is a strong incumbent with a substantial fundraising total, and with Youngkin's intentions still unclear, all 4 forecasters have it down as safe Democrat. The only poll here was surveyed by VCU, which shows Warner leading Youngkin by 8 percentage points back in mid-January. Our next state is Texas, which saw the 6th largest pro-Trump swing between 2020 and 2024, as he expanded his margin from 5.5 points all the way up to 14. That shift effectively dashed any hopes Democrats had of unseating 4-term Republican Senator John Cornyn in 2026, or at least that was the case, until Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton launched a primary challenge against Cornyn, setting the stage for a showdown between the GOP establishment and its hardline conservative base. Cornyn and Paxton have been at odds for years. Paxton has repeatedly criticized Cornyn for being insufficiently conservative, while Cornyn has pointed to Paxton's numerous legal troubles, including his 2023 impeachment by the Republican-controlled Texas House. So far, neither Donald Trump nor Senator Ted Cruz has endorsed a candidate, but Trump's endorsement is widely viewed as critical in determining the outcome of the primary. And right now, Paxton is leading. He's been ahead in every single primary poll conducted so far, and by double digits in 9 of the 11. Cornyn, however, still benefits from the power of incumbency, a sizable war chest, and endorsements from several prominent Senate colleagues. According to prediction market Kalshi, Paxton has roughly a 2 in 3 chance of winning the primary, and that could have significant implications for the general election. If Cornyn survives the primary, he would likely cruise to re-election by double digits, but if Paxton emerges as the nominee, the race could quickly become competitive, especially if Democrats nominate a high-profile challenger like Colin Allred or Beto O'Rourke. The latest general election polling tells the story. Cornyn leads Allred by 4 points and O'Rourke by 6, according to surveys from YouGov and Texas Southern University. But Paxton leads Allred by just 2 points and O'Rourke by 4. The major forecasters are split. Inside Elections and Cook rate the race as safe Republican, while Sabato's Crystal Ball puts it in the likely column. I'm inclined to agree with the latter. Paxton's candidacy introduces enough uncertainty to knock this one out of the safe zone, and with that projection locked in, Republicans are already favored to retain control of the Senate with 50 seats. Remember, the vice president casts the tie-breaking vote, and as of now, that's Republican J.D. Vance. The final likely state on my map is Ohio, where we're looking at a special election to fill the remainder of the Senate term vacated by Vance. Republican Governor Mike DeWine appointed Lieutenant Governor John Husted to the seat, making him the unelected incumbent heading into 2026. Husted is a seasoned statewide office holder with a strong political network, and unless Democrats field a top-tier candidate, he's clearly the favorite. And that's really what this race hinges on, whether former Senator Sherrod Brown or former Congressman Tim Ryan decides to run. Brown is reportedly weighing a bid, either for this Senate seat or for governor, and he'd be the Democrats' best shot at flipping it. Even then, he'd likely still enter the race as an underdog. In surveys conducted by Bowling Green State University and YouGov, Husted leads Brown by margins of 3 and 6 points, respectively, and leads Ryan by 6 and 7. That's enough for 2 of the 3 most reputable election forecasters to rate this race as likely Republican, while Inside Elections has it down as safe. I'd agree with that safe rating if Brown stays out of the race, but as long as there's a chance he jumps in, Ohio remains in the likely Republican column, with the potential to shift toward lean if the matchup materializes. The 6 states that remain on the board are all genuinely competitive. If a likely rating suggests one party holds a clear edge, but an upset remains possible, then a lean rating means one party has only a slight advantage, and the race is very much in play. The first state in that category is Minnesota. Democratic Senator Tina Smith is retiring, setting up the first open Senate contest in Minnesota since 2006. While Republicans haven't won a federal election here since 2002, Minnesota remains consistently competitive, with most races decided by single-digit margins. Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan currently holds the early edge in the Democratic primary, with Congresswoman Angie Craig seen as the next most likely contender. On the Republican side, the most prominent name in the race so far is former NBA player Royce White, but he lost to Amy Klobuchar by 16 points in 2024. Don't read too much into the battleground label used by Inside Elections. It's currently the only rating they're using this cycle outside of safe. The lean Democratic ratings from the other 3 major forecasters offer a more realistic read on the race. Unless Republicans can recruit a significantly stronger candidate, Flanagan, or whoever ultimately wins the Democratic nomination, should be favored to hold this seat. Similar circumstances up in New Hampshire. Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen is retiring, and Congressman Chris Pappas is the first to enter the race to succeed her. He's likely to remain the most prominent Democrat in the field. Unfortunately for Republicans, former Governor Chris Sununu has decided not to run. He would have been the party's strongest contender by far. Instead, it looks like former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown will likely win the Republican nomination. He's a strong candidate in his own right and should give Pappas a real challenge, but in the absence of any polling, will defer to the experts' lean Democrat rating. And given that Republicans haven't won a federal race here in over 15 years, that's what we'll go with on our map. Now only 4 states remain, and there's not much separating them from each other. They could all easily go either way, so let's just stick in New England here with Maine first, where incumbent Republican Susan Collins continues to be a political unicorn. Back in 2020, nearly every poll and analyst predicted her defeat. Yet she beat Democrat Sarah Gideon by 8 points, even as Joe Biden carried Maine by 9. To this day, she remains the only Republican to win a Senate race in a state simultaneously carried by a Democratic presidential nominee since 2004. Looking ahead to 2026, Maine is the only Republican-held seat in a state that Kamala Harris won, and it's widely considered Democrats' top pickup opportunity. Their best possible challenger would have been Congressman Jared Golden, but he has declined. If Golden did run, Democrats would probably have been favorites, but without him, their most established option is outgoing Governor Janet Mills, who doesn't necessarily boast awe-inspiring approval numbers. In the absence of polling again, the experts generally lean in favor of Collins, and I agree. It's essentially a coin flip, but given Collins's track record, she remains the narrow favorite, even though on fundamentals alone, the state leans more Democratic than New Hampshire. Now over to Michigan, where we have yet another open race following the retirement of Democrat Gary Peters. This one poses even more of a challenge for Democrats than Minnesota or New Hampshire, after Trump carried Michigan this past November by about 1 point. Both parties have had success in Michigan recently, but Democrats have been stronger outside of presidential races. They currently hold both U.S. Senate seats, all statewide executive offices, and control the state Senate. Republicans haven't won a Senate race here since 1994, but this is probably their best opportunity since then. On the Democratic side, with both former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg and outgoing Governor Gretchen Whitmer declining to run, the party lacks a clear top-tier name. Congresswoman Haley Stevens is currently the frontrunner among declared candidates, with State Senator Mallory McMorrow close behind. Stevens has slightly outperformed fundamentals in her last 3 House races by about 1 or 2 points, but nothing especially notable. On the Republican side, former Congressman Mike Rogers is expected to be the nominee. He ran a strong campaign in 2024, coming within 0.3 of a point of defeating Alyssa Slotkin in last year's open seat battle. As long as Republicans don't blow it by nominating someone like Tudor Dixon, they'll have a really good shot at flipping this race. We do have a couple of polls so far assessing the potential race between Stevens and Rogers, with Stevens leading Rogers in the most recent survey via Glengarriff Group, albeit by a single point. Meanwhile, our 3 major forecasters have the race down as toss-up, while Race to the White House says it tilts Democratic. But considering that this is a prediction channel, and placing the race down as a toss-up may be seen as a cop-out, I'll give Democrats the slightest edge here as the incumbent party. That leaves North Carolina and Georgia, the 2 most high-profile Senate races to watch this cycle. In North Carolina, Republican Tom Tillis is expected to seek a 3rd term, although he may face a primary challenge. Much like Cornyn in Texas, Tillis has long been associated with the establishment wing of the party and was even censured by the North Carolina GOP over his bipartisan support for gun control and same-sex marriage. Former RNC co-chair Laura Trump and Congressman Pat Harrigan have been floated as potential challengers. It's probably in Trump and the Republican Party's best interest to stick with Tillis, though, considering it appears increasingly likely that Roy Cooper will in fact run for the Democrats. The former governor is the strongest non-incumbent in the country. He maintained strong approval ratings through 2 terms, his universal name recognition, and an established fundraising network. If it comes down to Tillis versus Cooper, expect a razor-thin race, and that's backed up by polling. Cooper has led in all 4 public surveys so far, but only by narrow margins, +1 to +4. Like Maine and Michigan, this race is effectively a toss-up, but if I had to lean one way, I'd give the slight edge to Cooper. Finally, in Georgia, outgoing Governor Brian Kemp isn't running for Senate. Arguably the worst news Republicans may get all cycle. Kemp, like Cooper, would have been the strongest non-incumbent candidate for Republicans and likely would have been favored to unseat Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff, despite Ossoff being a strong candidate in his own right. After all, Ossoff made history in 2020 by revolutionizing political fundraising in Georgia and winning a high-profile runoff against then-incumbent Republican David Perdue. Without Kemp, Republicans don't have a remotely comparable replacement. Congressman Buddy Carter is the biggest name to have entered the race thus far, though another Congressman, Mike Collins, is the betting favorite. Neither candidate is all that awe-inspiring, especially in a race of this magnitude. It's also worth pointing out that while much of the country swung sharply to the right between the 2020 and 2024 elections, Georgia and North Carolina did not. Both are undergoing gradual demographic shifts that continue to benefit Democrats, expanding and diversifying urban areas, and an influx of college-educated transplants from liberal-leaning regions in the Northeast and West. Put it all together, and Ossoff now holds a clear edge in what was once shaping up to be Republicans' best flip opportunity. So based on the ratings and available polling, Republicans are on track to hold their Senate majority with 1 less seat than they came in with at 52 over the Democrats' 48. Obviously, this is an extremely early snapshot in time, and we don't yet have substantive polling in many of these key races, so things are sure to shift over the next year. But that does it for today's video. As always, feel free to share your thoughts on this map in the comments and let me know what other videos or topics you'd like to see me cover next. Shout out to my channel members listed in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed the content. Check out more of my videos here, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.